The Story.
I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. I'll be your host tonight. I'm just back from a week's worth of vacation in Butte, Montana, where I was hanging out with family and saw some gorgeous country. All right, all the ways to communicate with us are at the bottom of the screen there. You can email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com. You can also use the hashtag TheStoryKGW on Twitter, or you can leave us a voicemail. Call our phone number, 503-226-5090. Tomorrow night, we're going to see a national spectacle. Public hearings on TV at night, including right here on KGW, that delve into the January 6th attempted takeover of the U.S. Capitol. We're not going to have a show, which is fine. You should be watching the hearing instead. And when you do, know that there's a direct tie to our area through people and violent rallies that were held right here. Our first two stories will delve into these connections, and here's the first one of those. Hundreds of people were arrested after storming the Capitol building. The incident left 5 people dead and lawmakers running for safety. 8 people from Oregon and Southwest Washington were eventually charged as part of the investigation that followed. And as investigative reporter Kyle Aboshi found, some of those criminal cases are now quietly being resolved.
A father-son duo from Battleground, Washington are both set to accept plea deals with federal prosecutors for their role in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Jeff and Jeremy Grace were seen in videos and photos posing together inside the Capitol building during the insurrection. In March 2021, we interviewed the father, Jeff Grace. Why did you enter the Capitol building?
You know, I really don't know. To be honest, I don't know. I had no intention of it. And I don't want to say swept up by the crowd or swept up by my heart or swept up by this. I don't really have an answer for that.
Court records indicate the son, Jeremy Grace, pleaded guilty in April to a single count of entering and remaining in a restricted building. As part of the plea deal, federal prosecutors suggest Jeremy Grace will likely receive a sentence ranging from 0 to 6 months in prison, along with a fine from $500 to $9,500. A judge will have final say during formal sentencing in July. Court records show Jeremy Grace will also provide cooperation with additional investigation, including allowing agents to review any social media accounts in and around January 6, 2021, the day of the insurrection. His father, Jeff Grace, is scheduled for a plea hearing on June 17th. During his previous interview with KGW, Jeff Grace lied, claiming his son didn't enter the Capitol building.
He didn't go in the Capitol.
And Jeff Grace said he didn't take any photos or video. But court records prove otherwise. Images show the father and son posing together. Federal agents claim both Jeff and Jeremy Grace tried to delete the selfie-style videos shot during the insurrection. 5 people died, including a Capitol police officer in this.
Yes, sir.
How does that sit with you?
It's sad. It's tragic. There's no justification of it. And I would pray that if any of my actions caused any of that I would pray for forgiveness from their family, I guess. I don't know.
In August 2021, a federal judge ordered Jeff Grace surrender any guns and weapons while awaiting trial after he showed up armed during what prosecutors described as pre-planned confrontations in Portland and El Paso. In all, 8 people from Oregon and Southwest Washington are facing charges in relation to the Capitol riot. They include 2 brothers, Matthew and Jonathan Peter Klein. Photos provided by the Department of Justice show the Kleins inside the Capitol building on January 6th. According to court papers, Jonathan Peter Klein is a self-identified member of the far-right Proud Boys. The Klein brothers have pleaded not guilty. Federal prosecutors also relied on images taken from videos and social media to help build a case against Richard Harris. He is living at his father's house in Happy Valley while awaiting trial, scheduled for September. The FBI used surveillance and body-worn camera footage to help identify a 63-year-old Hillsborough man. Reed Christensen is awaiting trial on multiple charges in connection with the takeover of the Capitol after allegedly striking and pushing officers. Jeffrey Hubbard of Lincoln City was also charged. Federal prosecutors say he was spotted on surveillance video storming the Capitol on January 6th. Tipsters alerted the FBI about Mark Brew of Vancouver. He's accused of breaching the U.S. Capitol and is due in court next month for a status conference. In all, the U.S. Justice Department has charged more than 800 people with crimes related to the deadly assault on January 6, 2021.
It's interesting stuff, Kyle. Have you talked to Jeff Gray since that original interview?
Not directly. I did reach out to him today to see if he wanted to comment on the plea deal. He didn't reply. You know, Grace, he had been very active on social media, posting videos, speaking out against the government. But really, that's kind of stopped in the last few months. He's been pretty quiet.
How will these other cases play out? Are they going to be plea deals?
Tough to say. Most have status hearings next month. That's where they all come in and kind of check on where things stand. That should give us a little bit better read on if we'll see more plea deals for the local defendants or if they're actually going to head to trial.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kyle, for the update. Appreciate it. Federal prosecutors have also charged the former president of a group called the Proud Boys and 4 other members with seditious conspiracy for their actions in the Capitol and the attack on the Capitol building. The group might sound familiar. Long before they were in Washington, D.C., the group led several brawls right here in Portland. And a senior researcher for the Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks and legally battles hate groups, says it was no accident that the group targeted Portland, Oregon.
It's a group that was formed in 2016, and really since the beginning of their existence, they have focused on holding rallies around the country that are aimed at creating violent confrontations with people that they consider their political enemies. And the epicenter of that activity has always been Portland. And they have chosen Portland for a few reasons. One is that Portland has a long history of militant anti-fascism. It's a state that, or it's a city that had a very strong racist skinhead scene, particularly in the 1980s. And in response to that, we saw a anti-fascist movement develop to oppose it. And the Proud Boys' really main objective is to confront anti-fascists. For them, that acts as a form of propaganda. If they can get people to engage in violent confrontations with them and film it, they can put it on their social media, and that often ramps up support from members of the group and other like-minded people, and it can actually increase recruitment.
And it's interesting because I've covered several of those rallies or gatherings or whatever they are, and it does seem like there's quite a bit of taunting that goes back and forth between the two sides, and then inevitably the police come in to try and keep the two sides apart, and from at least the ones that I've been at, the Proud Boys sort of melt away, and then it's the police against Antifa, and the Proud Boys say, "See, there you go. That's what we're talking about."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Proud Boys are really trying to set up that kind of confrontation. They are going into these cities to create these combustible situations. These sort of situations wouldn't exist if they hadn't set them up in the first place. In the run-up to every rally, we'd see pretty much the same thing. They would spend months or weeks online planning to engage in violence, talking about what kinds of weapons they would bring to rallies, what kind of protective gear they would wear, and they would go that day ready to engage in violence using a lot of bombastic, aggressive language.
That's Cassie Miller there. She's tracked the Proud Boys through video feeds and over social media for the last 5 years. She's convinced that a lack of serious legal trouble for the Proud Boys after Portland rallies made them more bold. She also thinks the work to organize members for the Portland rallies and then publicize those events, that also helped the Proud Boys gain momentum and expertise when they eventually used in Washington, D.C.
So they have come back to Portland repeatedly because they really don't fear legal repercussions. They faced very few consequences for the rallies they repeatedly held in the city.
And do you think did that play any sort of role in the national pot boiling towards January 6th?
Mm-hmm. I think that the Proud Boys repeatedly coming to Portland did play a role in them eventually ending up at the Capitol on January 6th. Those years running up to early 2021, they were able to develop these robust nationwide networks. And a lot of that was happening at rallies in Portland. So there were a lot of local activists who were coming to those rallies, but a lot of people from other parts of the country as well. So someone like Joe Biggs, who is facing sedition charges, is not from Portland. He's not from the region, but he would repeatedly come there to engage in these rallies. And that's where the sort of nationwide network of Proud Boys really congealed.
So there's some context on the hearings that you'll see tomorrow night. Now I want your input. What do you think? Are you surprised to learn the Portland rallies helped the Proud Boys as they focused eventually on the nation's capital? Or are you skeptical about that? Do you think maybe there was no connection? Were you at any of the rallies? What was it like for you? Shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Our address is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090.
We've told you a million times the big one's going to be really bad. Well, now scientists say the tsunami generated by a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake could be even worse than predicted.
Our study shows that there is potential for a much bigger, much taller waves that will propagate farther inland.
When the story continues.
Welcome back. Keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com or give us a call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Well, here's a scary headline that caught our eye this week in The Guardian. A mega tsunami in the Pacific Northwest. It could be worse than predicted, the study says. Oh, that's great. I know you probably don't want to think about it, neither do I, but as we've told you many times, this could really happen at any time. We tracked down and talked to one of the study's authors there, Sylvain Babot, about what this means.
The official numbers for the worst case scenario is about 20 meters high. That's 60 feet or so. This is the current state of the art understanding of what will happen. Our study shows that there is potential for a much bigger, much taller waves that will propagate farther inland.
Well, how much taller is he talking about? Up to 3 times as tall. So if you do the math, 1 meter is about 3.2 feet. So 60 meters, nearly a wave 200 feet tall.
It seems almost too big to be true. But in Japan, if you remember the giant earthquake that happened in 2011, which was followed by a giant tsunami, the waves and the run-up, the flooded area, was as high as 60 meters. Okay, so these numbers are not impossible. And another important consideration is that when that happened, the Japanese official hazard maps did not prepare for that number. And so if you discuss these kind of numbers in 2010, it was deemed unrealistic, too big, and yet it happened.
So the question is, what would it take to produce such a high wave? Well, here in the Pacific Northwest, Babot says it all depends on where the earthquake hits, not so much on the intensity of the earthquake. Here's a diagram of a subduction zone like the one off our coast. Look to the top left side. See where it's called the outer wedge? Well, Babot says if the earthquake hits there, that is the sweet spot and we are in for trouble with a large tsunami.
And what we found is that what controls the tsunami height is where the earthquake happens. If it happens in this wedge that we talked about earlier, then even a tiny earthquake can generate a huge tsunami. And in fact, even a great earthquake, not great in what it does, but in size, if it stays deep and doesn't break this wedge, it doesn't actually create a very large tsunami. So you need giant earthquakes to not only break a large fault area, but you also need them to break all the way to the surface and break this wedge. And then when it does, you have this very exceptional tsunami. So the key here is that you can have large tsunamis even with small earthquakes if they take place very far offshore.
Well, I don't know about you, but this all makes me very tense. Let's bring in our chief meteorologist, Matt Zaffino, to talk a little more about tsunamis and earthquakes. Matt?
Thanks so much, Pat. You know, there's a lot going on here, a lot to unpack. That is very, very important research, though. And notice he kept saying that if the earthquake reaches the surface, that's key. And what he means is the surface of the sea floor, because to get a tsunami, it doesn't matter if it's an earthquake or something else. What you need is displacement of water. So you need that earthquake to reach the sea floor to displace the water. That's what causes the wave. Now, just as a reminder, we live in a very geologically active region. Each one of these dots represents an earthquake somewhere in the northwest or the west coast in the last 10 days, and there's a lot of dots. Most of these less than a 2.0 magnitude, not a big deal. Most of them not offshore, which the earthquake needs to be to generate a tsunami. Back to the map, though, in this new research, this is that wedge area that he's talking about. And one of the things this research says is that if that wedge area is large, well, then there's simply more room for an earthquake that happens deep in the earth to reach the seafloor. Just so happens that the Cascadia subduction zone off our coast here has a very large wedge, one of the top 5 largest wedges in the world as these things are measured. That's why the risk potentially is higher here for a very, very large earthquake. And if you're wondering what's the biggest tsunami that's ever been recorded on Earth, the wave was about 150 feet tall. It was up off the coast of Alaska, and you know what caused it? Not an earthquake. There was an undersea landslide that did what I said before, displaced the water, generated the wave. So it's all about displacing the water. That's what earthquakes do if they reach the seafloor. So that's why these things are very, very complicated in their mechanics. But forecasting them is even more complicated. It's very complex, which is why this is a difficult thing to do. The size, the depth of the earthquake matters, as we just heard, and then the shape of the seafloor, including that wedge, and the shape of the coastline matters as well. If you recall, the coastline in Japan with the tsunami and the earthquake back in 2011, very, very flat. So it's super easy for that seawater to run very, very far inland. Our coast is a lot different. We've got the Coast Range, which acts as a big barrier. That doesn't mean we wouldn't have issues. We would, for sure. But again, it's a different animal here on the West Coast. So all of this new research, what needs to happen next is it needs to be incorporated into the tsunami modeling, and the research needs to be studied even further, which I'm sure it will. Pat?
Thank you, Matt. I learn something every time you're on. Thanks a lot for that. Well, what do you think of these bike racks in downtown Portland? See anything out of the ordinary? Some say they're actually there to keep homeless campers away. And it turns out the city did not give anyone a permit to install them. We'll take a look when the story continues. Keep those emails coming in. I've been just checking them. A lot of strong opinions, especially about the Proud Boys. Now to our homeless crisis. We've been following what seems like a never-ending cycle at Laurelhurst Park in southeast Portland. Campers move in, neighbors get mad, the city clears the campers out, and then it all repeats all over again. Well, here's another episode. Over the weekend, it appears some neighbors tried to take matters into their own hands. They put planters along a street where tents were previously set up, but they did not have any permits for the planters, and so they were removed within 24 hours. Here's Alma McCarty.
Before there were mounds of dirt and gravel lining Southeast 37th Avenue near Laurelhurst Park, there were planters, lots of them, as captured by Alex Linsker.
Saturday morning, I'd actually seen a bunch of people. I was like, okay, but I didn't interact because it just looked kind of shady to me.
Others passing through saw the activity too. As first reported in Willamette Week, several people spent Saturday morning putting dirt into these planters or troughs, seemingly to prevent camping along this stretch of road.
I just thought it was a gardening project. I didn't know who was doing it.
This landscaping project of sorts didn't last long, to the dismay of some, like Aaron Miller, who lives a block away.
It's disheartening. I mean, I really thought it looked good, and I was happy that there was going to be something beautiful here.
PBOT tells KGW they didn't get an application for a permit to put the planters or anything else up in this spot, confirming city crews didn't remove them either.
They didn't get a permit. They should get a permit.
While Alex says he's glad to see they're gone.
This is definitely not the way to deal with it.
Ann Masters,
I just heard that this had been gone, so I wanted to run over and see.
Said this is exactly the type of solution she was considering to try and deter homeless camps in her own neighborhood nearby.
I'm 100% for it, because the people that are on the street that are causing the problems will not live by rules. That is the bottom line. But yet we can't do anything to keep them off our property.
KGW was unable to reach the neighborhood association to independently confirm the purpose of these planters. Camps and camp sweeps in and around Laurelhurst Park have created tension in the neighborhood for years.
The city is not going to help us. They absolutely will not do anything for us. So we know we have to stand up individually and do something.
I think government could be nicer to people with less money, and I think that would be the solution.
Just unfortunate. You know, I'm just hoping the city comes in and helps a little bit more.
Alma McCarty, KGW News.
All right, so take a look at these bike places down here on, this is in downtown Portland, in Old Town. It's what some are calling hostile architecture. Others are calling a good idea to clear the sidewalks of tents. Someone installed 22 bike racks on the sidewalks along Northwest Broadway. That's between Flanders and Gleason. It's an area where a lot of people used to camp and near where a homeless village is closing because of concerns about gun violence. It's not an area that seems like it would suddenly need nearly 24 new bike racks, according to Bike Portland. The building it's next to is not active, and there's not a high demand for bike parking there. The property is owned by Schnitzer Properties. We reached out to see if they're the ones who installed the bike racks and why. So far, we've not heard back. The president, Jordan Schnitzer, is a well-known philanthropist. He bought the Wapato jail from the city, which has now become a homeless shelter. He's also argued the city needs to do more to support business owners and do more to get homeless people off the streets downtown. We checked in with PBOT. They say no one has a permit to put new bike racks along the sidewalk. They told us we are not aware of this and did not permit this bike rack installation. We're taking a look at the situation and considering our next steps. Hostile architecture is a tactic used a few times pretty effectively to deter camping in our area. ODOT has used boulders to keep people out of certain areas. This was Delta Park last year. And in 2019, ODOT spent $1 million to put boulders in other places where they didn't want people camping. They said it was actually cheaper than clearing out the camps. In Vancouver, city officials designed these benches and walls at Esther Short Park to keep people from being able to lie down. Keep sending your questions and comments to the story at kgw.com. Still ahead, how you can help your community. For this week's Hey Help campaign, we're asking you to donate to Because People Matter. That's a Portland nonprofit that holds an event called Night Strike each week for people experiencing homelessness. Every Thursday night under the Burnside Bridge, the group offers hot meals, haircuts, clothing, shoes, and sleeping bags. If you want to help out, just hold your phone's camera right now up to the QR code on your screen, or you can go to kgw.com/heyhelp. This is a micro donation drive, so feel free to give any amount, no matter how small or how big. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. But remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow. Actually, I'll see you the next night.
This is KGW News at 6.